Hey guys, tonight we're going to step quietly past the banquet hall doors, away from the warm glow of the great hearth, and slip into the unseen arteries of a medieval castle. Out there in the candlelit chambers and towering walls, history celebrates kings, queens, and gallant knights. But here in the smoke, in the chill, in the shadows, you'll find the true keepers of this stone giant. You're about to walk in their shoes, though you probably won't survive the week. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move along a side passage, boots echoing softly on uneven stone. The grand hall with its tapestries and music fades behind you. Ahead, the air cools, carrying a faint tang of ash, and something sour old grease maybe, or the scent of unwashed wool. Your fingers brush the rough wall. It's damp. In the half-light, shapes emerge: a bent figure, hauling a bucket, another crouched over the floor with a rag. No one looks up. They are too busy keeping the castle alive, in ways no ballad ever sings about. Life beyond the throne room is relentless. Every wall you pass hides a back corridor. Every back corridor hides another human gear in the castle's vast grinding machinery. These people don't wear silk. They don't carry swords. Their armor is a rag apron, stiff with soot. Their weapons, a broom, a bucket, a shovel. You hear the swish of brushes, the scrape of iron on stone, the muted thud of a cartwheel over a flagstone crack. Some of these jobs haven't changed much in hundreds of years. Historians still argue whether the castle's servants were truly better off than peasants in the fields. Yes, they were indoors and near the Lord's table, but that came with its own brand of hardship. If you worked here, you answered to someone every hour, and the walls themselves felt like they were watching. You catch sight of a boy, maybe 10, darting past with a stack of firewood. He doesn't look at you, only scurries through a narrow doorway that glows with the dull red of banked coals. Somewhere beyond, a dog barks twice, and then stops, as if remembering it's not supposed to draw attention. That's the strange rhythm here, things done quickly, quietly, without the luxury of pause. The scullery maid wipes her forehead with the back of her hand, smearing a streak of ash across her temple. She's one of dozens you'll meet tonight, each with a task that would exhaust you in an hour. But here, exhaustion is simply the baseline. The spit boy crouching by the kitchen fire, the lawn dresser bent over a patch of trampled grass, the silent guard posted in the dark until dawn, they're all part of this hidden clockwork. You take a turn and the sound changes less. Chatter, more clang of metal, the dull whoosh of a bellows somewhere in the depths. Every corner hides another life, another job that exists solely to keep the illusion of castle grandeur alive for the people upstairs. You might never know their names, but without them the great hall's feasts would be cold, the stables filthy, the battlements unmanned. And so you keep walking into the smoke, the damp, and the hum of unseen labor. You pass under a low arch and the air grows warmer, though it's a damp warmth that clings to your skin. The corridor narrow ceiling pressing close overhead. Here a single torch burns its light, licking the walls in uneven strokes. You notice the floor beneath your boots grooved and worn from centuries of feet, carts and spills. A figure shuffles toward you, balancing a wooden tub sloshing with grey water. The scullery maid again, or perhaps one of her fellows, it's hard to tell in the dimness. Her shoes squelch damp with who knows what, and you instinctively step aside to let her pass. She doesn't slow, doesn't speak. Every step is already calculated in her day. Too much wasted time, and the firewood runs short. The stew goes cold. The steward takes notice. And in this place, the steward's notice is rarely good news. Behind her, you glimpse a cluster of people at work, in a cramped chamber. One kneels to scrub soot from an iron pot big enough for a grown man to hide in. Another wrings out cloths over a basin, her knuckles white from the effort. The clang of metal ladles echoes bouncing off stone walls, slick with condensation. You can almost taste the air smoke grease and the faint tang of lye soap, sharp enough to sting your nose. It's here you remember a quirky detail historians like to mention in some castles. The scullery wasn't just for kitchen drudgery. It doubled as a kind of sanitation station where chamber pots from the upper floors were brought down to be emptied and scrubbed. Yes, that means on certain mornings a maid's first task might be deciding which smelled worse, the leftover fish stew or the Lord's personal waste bucket. The records don't always agree, but the consensus is that neither improved with time. You follow a narrow passage that slopes downward toward a faint sound of rushing water. The castle's hidden veins, drained cisterns and wells were as vital as the battlements. You picture the unseen hands keeping them running, hauling water up endless stairs, pouring it into barrels, guarding the cistern from contamination. The irony is almost funny here. You can be surrounded by stone walls, thicker than a tree is tall, and still your survival hangs on whether a tired teenager remembers to cover the well. Rounding a corner, you find yourself in a sort of junction, a crossroads of servants' paths. One arch leads to the kitchens, its warmth spilling out in waves. Another winds towards the stables, carrying the faint, sweet, sour scent of hay and manure. Straight ahead, a narrow stair climbs sharply, torchlight marking the way. A man in rough wool pauses at the base, eyes scanning you without much interest, before he shoulders a sack and begins the climb. That's the silent guard, off duty now perhaps, but still moving, with the measured step of someone trained to listen to the dark. The thing about these corridors is how alive they feel even when no one speaks. The castle breathes here, the creak of beams, the shuffle of boots, the hiss of a kettle. You start to notice rhythms. The scullery's water runs coincide with the kitchen's busiest hours. The stable boy's rush comes just before the guard changes. It's a strange choreography, invisible to the nobles above, but essential to keeping their world intact. As you pause, the boy with firewood reappears, darting past again. This time, he's got a slice of bread in his mouth, hands still gripping the logs. He doesn't even stop to chew, just keeps moving. You catch his eye for a second. There's no malice there, just the steady, weary acceptance of someone who knows this is his life, for now at least. Historians still argue whether boys like him had any real chance of escaping such roles, or if the castle simply absorbed them until they were too old, too worn to serve. And so step by step, you push deeper, past the edges of where visitors would ever be allowed, into the living heart of the castle's forgotten workforce. You descend another flight of steps, the stone damp beneath your boots, and find yourself in a chamber that feels almost subterranean. The air is thick here, warmer from nearby hearths, but also heavy with the layered smells of centuries. Ash, smoke, and something distinctly organic cling to your senses. You blink against the dimness, your eyes adjusting to the faint flicker of a lantern set on a barrel. In the far corner, a woman kneels beside a massive cauldron, her hands deep in murky water, scrubbing something with a brush worn to the nub. She hums quietly, not for joy, but out of habit, the way people sometimes do to keep rhythm in their work. The sound is swallowed by the room before it can reach the walls. You notice how she shifts her weight, often knees aching from the stone back sore from bending. It's the kind of slow grinding discomfort that builds over hours until it becomes part of you. That's the truth about life here. It's not dramatic pain like a sword wound or a fall from a ladder, but the daily wear and tear that reshapes you in silence. At the doorway, a man hauls in a new load of firewood, the scent of fresh cut timber, briefly brightening the air. He drops it near the hearth with a thud that makes the lantern tremble. No one thanks him. Gratitude is rare in these walls unless it comes from a fellow servant, and even then it's usually just a nod or a quick look. Somewhere above, faint music trickles down the lords and ladies, feasting, perhaps dancing. You imagine them unaware that the roast they enjoy was turned for hours by a boy who will eat only a crust tonight, that their candlelight comes from wicks trimmed by hands already blistered from other work. If they do think of the servants at all, it's likely as part of the furniture necessary but invisible. A quirky tidbit you've heard comes to mind in some castles. Certain corridors were deliberately built narrow and low, so servants could move unseen, crouching beneath sight lines while the nobility passed by. Whether that's universally true is debated, but here, pressed between cold walls in this cramped space, you can believe it. The design itself seems to remind you that you're not meant to be noticed. You linger a moment longer, feeling the pulse of the place. It's in the scrape of a pot, the snap of a log in the fire, the muted cough of someone down the hall. You can almost sense the generations of people who have stood right where you are, each one a silent link in the long chain that kept the castle alive. And then you move on, because that's what life here demands: constant motion, constant service. The grand hall's glory is built on these shadows, and every unseen step you take tonight will pull you deeper into their world. You wake before the first bell, not because you want to, but because the stone beneath you has sucked the last trace of warmth from your body. The thin blanket you used in the night lies crumpled at your feet, half damp from some unknown leak in the wall. Your back aches from the uneven floor. Before your eyes have even adjusted to the dark, you hear footsteps, heavy, hurried, and feel the brief thud of a boot brushing your side. No one apologizes. No one ever does. The scullery maid's day starts here in this half-lit, half-frozen corner of the castle. The world above may still be dreaming, but down here the clock is already ticking. You push yourself up, rubbing your arms for warmth, and fumble for the coarse apron that will be your armor against the day's endless assault of grease, soot, and boiling water. First comes the water run. You grab the 2 wooden buckets, the handles polished smooth by years of other hands gripping them. They're heavier than they should be and empty for now. The trip to the well will change that soon enough. Out in the yard, the cold air bites your face, the sky only beginning to pale. Your breath hangs in front of you like a ghost, and you try not to think about the distance. Just focus on the rhythm of your boots on the packed dirt. The creak of the bucket handles. Reaching the well means bracing yourself for the icy rope rough against your palms. The pulley groans as you lower the bucket into the darkness, then splashes faintly when it hits water. The chill climbs up the rope and into your arms as you haul it back, spilling a little over your feet. No matter, they were already cold. Historians still argue whether castle wells were truly safe from contamination given their proximity to kitchens, stables, and refuse pits. But right now you don't have time for debates. You have a cook waiting for her water, and she's the kind you do not keep waiting. Back inside the kitchen is waking. The hearth spits and cracks as someone pokes at the coals, coaxing them into flame. The air is a stew of smells, yesterday's ash, this morning's bread dough rising under cloth, and a lingering tang of boiled cabbage. You set the buckets down where the cook can reach them, careful not to block her path. A sideways glance from her is warning enough you don't speak unless spoken to. Your next task is the bread oven. Yesterday's loaves are cooling on a shelf, and the new dough must go in soon. You fetch a broom to sweep out the ash, moving in swift, practiced strokes, so the fine grey dust doesn't settle back onto the oven floor. Behind you, someone curses softly as a jug slips from their grasp and shatters on the flagstones. The cook's head snaps up, eyes narrowing. You instinctively shrink back, relieved. It wasn't you this time. A quirky detail about scullery work, one not often mentioned in romantic tales, is that rats were as common as spoons. They skitter in the shadows, bold enough to dart past your feet if the scraps are worth it. You've learned to ignore them unless they head for the bread, in which case you throw whatever's nearest to hand and hope for a direct hit. By the time the first bell rings for the upper floors, your arms already ache. Your apron is streaked with soot and flour, and the day hasn't even truly begun. The first rush hits like a wave. Orders spill from the cook's mouth faster than you can sort them in your head. Scrub the trenchers, fetch more firewood, slice the onions before the steward arrives. You move without thinking, because thinking slows you down, and slowing down gets you noticed, and not in a good way. At the basin, you plunge your hands into lukewarm, greasy water, swirling it with a wooden brush to loosen the crusted remains of last night's meal. The smell rises up in a cloud old, fat, faintly sour beer and a tang of metal from the plates. It sticks to your skin no matter how hard you scrub. You wonder not for the first time if your hands will ever stop smelling like the kitchen. From the corner, the spit boy's voice pipes up thin, quick asking if you've seen the small knife. You haven't. Before you can answer, the cook barks at him to mind his fire. He scurries off the hem of his tunic, catching on a stool leg. The stool tips. You catch it before it falls narrowly, avoiding another scolding. It's like this all morning, everything one breath away from chaos. Someone drops a lump of dough into your arms, warm and pliable. You know your task, shape it into loaves, without tearing the gluten, without leaving lumps, and definitely without leaving fingerprints in the smooth top. The steward will notice imperfections, and his remarks are sharper than his knife. As you knead, you overhear the cook muttering about the steward's latest complaint. Apparently yesterday's venison was too smoky, which, given the kitchen's open fire, is as absurd as blaming the sky for being blue. The firewood pile runs low, so you head to the store. The corridor outside the kitchen is barely wide enough for two people to pass, and today it's clogged with the laundry maid carrying a basket taller than she is. You sidestep her, pressing into the wall's cold damp to let her by. She nods, but doesn't smile. There's no energy for pleasantries here. At the wood store, you find the pile smaller than you expected. The bark is damp. Someone didn't keep the cover on overnight. You take the driest pieces you can find, stacking them in your arms until they dig into your ribs. On the way back, the spit boy appears again, face flushed from the fire. He's carrying a dripping haunch of meat, clearly too heavy for him, and you both shuffle sideways to avoid disaster. Historians still debate whether scullery maids could rise above their station, maybe become cooks or stewards if they proved themselves. In truth, it probably depended on the household's mood, the size of the staff, and luck. For most like you, the path led not upward, but simply forward, one day into the next, each indistinguishable from the last. Back in the kitchen, the cook gestures impatiently for the wood. You drop it beside the hearth, dusting splinters from your apron. The fire roars as fresh logs catch the heat, pushing back the cold that still clings to your bones. You allow yourself a single deep breath, savoring the brief comfort before turning to the next task. You're sent to scrub the great kettle's iron beasts that take two people to lift when full. Today they're mercifully empty, but each still carries a thick crust of burned porridge or stew at the bottom. You fill one with hot water from the hearth, the steam hitting your face and opening your pores until the smell of scorched grain seeps into you. With a rag and handful of coarse salt, you scour in circles, your wrists aching. The trick you've learned is to use just enough pressure to scrape the blackened layer without tearing the rag. If you ruin too many rags, the laundress will have words for you, and those words are sharper than the steward's. The cook shouts for bread to be turned. You wipe your hands on your apron and head to the oven, peering inside at the pale loaves swelling under the heat. You slide the wooden peel beneath each one, shifting them so they bake evenly. A waft of yeast and browning crust escapes one of the few pleasant smells of your day, and for a heartbeat you allow yourself to imagine tearing into a loaf, still warm. But that's not for you. These will be carried upstairs to tables you'll never sit at. Rats skitter in the shadows behind the flour sacks. You hear one squeal, perhaps caught in a trap set the night before. You're tempted to investigate, but the cook's voice yanks you back. There's spilled grease near the hearth, and you're the one to clean it before someone slips. Kneeling, you scatter ash over the slick patch, the fine dust mixing into a grey paste beneath your fingers. You scoop it up with a wooden paddle, careful not to smear it into the stone. By mid-morning, the kitchen is a furnace. The spit boy turns the roast, his face shiny with sweat. You refill his cup from the water bucket, and he nods once in thanks, eyes never leaving the meat. The air is thick with smoke. Your throat scratches with each breath. You cough into your sleeve, trying to keep it quiet. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Some scullery maids were tasked with collecting the drippings from roasts, not just for gravy, but for reuse in other dishes, or even for polishing leather. You've done it yourself, pouring the hot, fatty liquid into jars, the smell clinging to your skin for days. Whether that's a privilege or just another unpleasant chore is up for debate. Finally, the cook announces the midday meal for the upper hall. The kitchen bursts into controlled chaos, platters, loaded sauces, ladled bread sliced. You're too busy clearing the mess to watch it all go upstairs, but you catch the tail end of the procession, steaming, dishes vanishing into the stairwell, footsteps fading. Then silence broken only by the crackle of the hearth. You lean against the wall for a moment, rolling your shoulders. The day is far from over, but in this brief lull, you almost feel the stone's coolness seeping into your back, grounding you. Outside, the bell tolls, once echoing through the corridors. Another hour gone, another set of tasks waiting. The midday lull doesn't last. You're called to the side table, where a pot of watery stew waits not for the lords and ladies, but for you and the other kitchen hands. The scullery maid's meal is quick standing, if space is tight, and shared with anyone who happens to be passing through. You ladle the thin broth into a wooden bowl, the steam rising in weak spirals. Floating in it are a few tired vegetables, turnip, maybe carrot, and a shred or two of meat if you're lucky. Today you're not. You settle on an upturned bucket, careful to keep your elbows tucked in. The stew is hot at least, and the salt from the cook's hand is just enough to keep it from tasting like boiled water. Around you, the others eat in silence, broken only by the occasional clink of a spoon on wood, or the scrape of bread against the bowl. Even conversation takes energy, and you're saving what little you have for the afternoon's work. There's an unspoken code here, a set of survival rules everyone follows. The first, never contradict the cook. If she says the sky is green, you nod and stir the pot. The second, keep out of the steward's path. Unless summoned, his temper is shorter than the days in winter. The third, when a noble passes, step aside, eyes down. Even if you've just been sent on an urgent errand, their way is always more important. You've seen what happens to those who forget. Once a new kitchen boy stumbled into the great hall with his cap still on. The steward spotted him, and though the punishment was only a scolding and extra work, the boy's ears burned red for the rest of the day. Historians still argue whether such rules were rigidly enforced everywhere, or if it varied from one lord's household to another. Here they're ironclad. A scrap of bread is passed your way, its crust hard enough to scrape your gums. You dunk it in the stew, softening it, and chew slowly to make it last. To waste food is to court disaster. There's no telling when your next meal might be delayed by work or stolen by the hounds. Those dogs, plump and glossy, eat better than most of the staff. You've seen them gnaw bones thick with meat while you scrape your bowl for the last smear of turnip. Some claim there's a sort of camaraderie in these moments that shared hardship bonds people together. Maybe so, but it's a quiet bond, more like a truce. No one here came to make friends. You came to keep your place, your bread, and your skin unbruised. And that means following the rules, even the ones that make no sense at all. When the bowls are empty, you set yours aside, wiping it with the edge of your sleeve. There's no time to linger already. The cook is barking new orders. You and 2 others move to clear the trestle where you ate, stacking bowls and spoons into a bucket for washing. The smell of the stew clings to your hands, mingling with the ever-present scent of ash and damp wool. Back at the basin, the water is cold now, a cloudy grey soup of grease and crumbs. You plunge your hands in anyway, fingers numbing as you scrub. Beside you, the laundry maid works silently, her arms raw from soap and icy rinse water. She doesn't complain. No one does. Complaints are a luxury, and luxuries are for the upper floors. The spit boy appears again, slipping in from the hearth's glow. His face is shiny with sweat, hair plastered to his forehead. He leans on the wall for a moment, catching his breath before dipping a cup into the water bucket. You notice his hands, small, red, blistered. He cradles the cup awkwardly, careful not to spill. You don't ask how much longer he'll be there. The answer is always the same, until the meat is done, no matter how long that takes. There's a bit of noise from the far corner, 2 boys whispering as they pass a crust between them. They've got it wrapped in a scrap of cloth, hidden from the cook's sharp eyes. Sharing food is risky, but so is letting someone go hungry. In this place, debts are remembered, and a shared crust today might mean help with a heavy load tomorrow. One of the older men, he handles deliveries from the outer gate, drops by to return an empty sack. Steward's in a mood, he mutters low enough for only you to hear. You nod, tucking the warning away. It means keep your head down, don't be caught idle, and for heaven's sake, don't spill anything. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind in some castle's mealtime for servants was deliberately staggered so the kitchens never stopped working. There was no all-eat-together moment. Instead, a rotating trickle of hands came and went, eating only when someone else could cover their tasks. Whether that was for efficiency or control is still up for debate, but either way, it meant rest was always in short supply. The sound of boots in the corridor signals the end of the brief reprieve. The steward himself passes the doorway, his gaze sweeping the kitchen like a hawk. He doesn't pause, but the tension he leaves behind is palpable. Everyone moves faster, voices lower the air thicker with the pressure to keep everything in perfect order. You dry your hands quickly, knowing the next task is only moments away. In a place like this, a full stomach, no matter how meager, just means you're better fueled for the next round of work. The cook sends you to fetch more root vegetables from the storehouse, a squat, dark room tucked away off the main corridor. You grab a woven basket with a frayed handle and step into the cooler air beyond the kitchen, the shift in temperature a small relief after hours of smoke and heat. Your boots echo faintly on the uneven flagstones, each step sending up a faint smell of damp stone. The storehouse greets you with the scent of earth and burlap. layered with the subtle sharpness of onion skins and the faint mustiness of corners left untouched for too long. Heaps of carrots, turnips, and onions are piled in rough mounds, some still streaked with clinging dirt, others beginning to sprout pale shoots that curl like ghostly fingers. You crouch, running your hands over the vegetables, searching for those firm enough to last another day in the pot. Each choice feels like a small gamble. Pick one too soft, and you'll hear about it when it turns to mush in the stew. A rat darts along the far wall, vanishing behind a sack of grain. You pause, listening for more movement, then resume. Rodents are just part of the background here. You learn to ignore them unless they get too bold. The cook once joked that the rats knew the kitchen schedule better than the staff, and judging by how they appear just before scraps are tossed out, she might be right. On the way back, you pass the narrow side door where refuse is carried outside. The hinges groan when it swings open, letting in a slice of grey daylight and the brisk smell of the yard. A boy with a wooden barrow of scraps is just trundling out dogs, weaving eagerly around his legs in hopeful loops. The smell draws them like magnets, bones gristle and stale crusts. You pause to watch one particularly bold hound snatch a dripping scrap before darting away, tail wagging furiously. It's hard not to notice that their share of meat puts your midday stew to shame. Stepping back into the kitchen, the heat closes over you like a heavy blanket. The table where you set the vegetables is already cluttered with knives' peels and the rhythmic thud of chopping. An assistant with sleeves rolled high takes the carrots from your basket without a glance, his knife moving so fast you can barely see the blade. The air hums with the familiar afternoon beat, chop, stir, stoke, the fire, carry, scrub, repeat. Time here is measured not by the sun, but by the bells and the rhythm of the work. Without them, the hours would blur into one endless stretch of labor. You've learned to gauge the day by sound alone. The sharper clang of a pot lid means the stew is nearly ready. The softer rustle of brooms on stone means the corridor is being cleared for the steward's rounds. Once long ago, an older maid told you that the secret to survival in service was to become invisible not by hiding, but by moving so naturally through the work that you drew no notice. You've spent months perfecting this art, gliding around the kitchen with just enough speed to be efficient, but never rushed. Too slow and you're lazy. Too fast and you're wasteful. The sweet spot lies in a rhythm you can keep all day, a pace that lets you vanish into the background. Historians sometimes debate whether servants formed their own underground culture, a silent web of understanding invisible to the nobility. Living here, you know it's true. A glance can mean help me lift this. A cough can mean the steward's coming. The flick of a wrist can signal save me a crust from the loaf. These small exchanges carry as much weight as formal orders. The afternoon deepens the kitchen, glowing like a forge. Outside in the great hall, nobles dine and gossip under tapestries, their laughter rising faintly above the clatter of your world. In here, your music is different, the scrape of a ladle on the pot's bottom, the hollow thunk of a cleaver splitting bone, the soft whoosh of air as the bellows breathe life into the flames. You keep your head down, hands steady, letting the rhythm carry you toward the next bell. Because in this place, the work doesn't end. It simply changes shape. The heat hits you first. Even before you step fully into the spit boy's corner of the kitchen, the air here is hotter, denser, carrying the scent of roasting meat that would make your stomach growl if the smoke didn't claw at your throat. The boy himself, though boy feels generous since he can't be more than 9, sits on a low stool before the fire hands lock to a long wooden pole that runs through a haunch of venison. His job is simple in description, brutal in execution: keep the meat turning at just the right pace for hours. You watch him for a moment. His hair clings in damp strands to his forehead, his cheeks flushed crimson. The firelight paints his skin in flickers of orange and gold, but it also shows the beginnings of blisters across his knuckles. The heat never stops. It's relentless, wrapping him in a cocoon of dry air that cracks his lips and parches his throat. He works with the mechanical focus of someone who knows there's no end to this until the cook says so. There's a reason historians often note that the spit boy's role was one of the harshest in the kitchen. You have to imagine holding your arms in one position for so long that the muscles shake from fatigue, all while breathing smoke and fat-laden air. Some records even mention boys collapsing from heat stroke, though whether that was common or just the horror stories is still up for debate. The pole creaks softly as it turns the meat glistening, where the fat runs down its sides and hisses into the fire. The smell is rich and heavy, almost too much, in this close space. You wonder if the boy even tastes the food he helps cook. Chances are his share will be a scrap at best, more likely just the satisfaction of being told he didn't burn it. A small dog curls nearby, nose twitching at every drop of fat that falls. You know the animal will get more from this roast than the boy who tends it. That's just the way of things here. Status matters even among creatures, and a hound favored by the Lord can expect better scraps than a human who works for him. The boy adjusts his grip, shifting the weight of the pole in his blistered palms. He doesn't look at you. Maybe he's too focused, or maybe he's learned it's easier not to notice anyone passing by. You catch yourself holding your breath, as if by breathing too loud you might distract him and throw off the roast. And then you step back because standing too close means your skin starts to prickle from the heat, and you know he doesn't have the luxury of leaving. The fire roars in uneven waves, sometimes spitting embers that bounce against the boy's bare shins. He doesn't flinch anymore, not because it doesn't hurt, but because flinching risks slowing the turn. The cook, who has a sixth sense for anything that might ruin her meat, would be on him in a heartbeat. You notice the small bucket at his feet, half filled with a greasy broth. Every so often, he dips a cloth into it and wipes the surface of the meat, basting it to keep the roast from drying out. The motion is quick, almost instinctive now, and he times it between turns so the cloth doesn't scorch in the flames. A thin trail of smoke curls from the dripping fat, carrying a scent that might make nobles salivate, but only makes you think of how long you've gone without a proper meal. It's easy to imagine how a day in this corner can stretch into a private eternity. The only measure of time is the changing color of the meat, the crackle of the fire, and the ache in his hands. You've heard stories, some confirmed, some disputed, that spit boys were sometimes chained to their post, not as punishment, but to ensure they didn't wander away during long roasts. Historians still argue whether that was a widespread practice or just a grim exaggeration passed down by servants with dark humor. The boy coughs once-twice into his shoulder. The smoke here is a constant dry sting that works its way into your lungs and stays there. You felt it yourself just standing near the hearth for a few minutes. You can't imagine breathing it for hours. His eyes water and he blinks them clear, never missing a turn. From behind the kitchen, bustles voices rising and falling in the usual rhythm of orders and acknowledgements. But here at the spit, it's almost meditative in its monotony. The boy's whole world is reduced to wood meat and fire. You realize that if the rest of the castle collapsed, he might not notice until the roast was done. He shifts his seat slightly, trying to give his legs a break without losing his position. The stool creaks and the dog lifts its head, hopeful for a scrap. The boy gives it nothing. There's nothing to spare. It strikes you watching him that this is more than a job. It's a kind of slow test, a daily trial by fire that decides whether a person learns endurance or burns out entirely. You move closer again, just enough to see the fine spray of fat that mists the air when the boy bastes the meat. Tiny droplets catch the firelight for an instant before vanishing into the haze. Your skin prickles not from the heat this time, but from the thought of standing here day after day, breathing that same greasy mist into your lungs. The smell alone will cling to him for hours after the fire is banked, seeping into his clothes, hair and skin, until he carries it like a second shadow. The cook steps in to inspect his work, eyes narrowed in silent calculation. She prods the roast with a fork, turns it slightly on the pole and mutters something about needing more even browning. The boy's hands tighten and he adjusts his turning rhythm ever so slightly. You notice how he doesn't answer her. Speaking would only dry his throat further and invite more attention. In this role, silence is its own form of survival. Historians sometimes remark on the irony of the spit boy's position, so close to abundance, yet perpetually hungry. You can see that truth here. Just a few feet from him, the meat glistens with juices, the air heavy with its scent. Yet his own dinner will likely be little more than a ladle of stew and a crust of bread. Some fringe accounts even claim that desperate boys given a moment alone would tear off a small bite from the underside of a roast, hoping the absence would go unnoticed. Whether that's truth or servant folklore, you suspect the temptation is very real. The dog shifts again, inching closer, its eyes trained on the dripping roast. It's patient, knowing its reward will come when the meat is carved upstairs and the scraps tossed down. You wonder if the boy ever envies the dog's certainty. At least the hound can count on a good meal tonight. Time stretches. The boy's shoulders hunch, his head tilts forward, and for a second you think he might doze off from the heat. But then he jerks upright, rotates the spit twice in quick succession, and basts the roast once more. He's back in the rhythm, back in the endless cycle of turn-based breathe, endure. Eventually, the cook gives a short nod, permission to stop. The boy lowers the spit into its resting brackets, muscles trembling from the effort. He wipes his face with his sleeve, leaving a streak of soot across his cheek, and for a moment just sits there. eyes unfocused as if listening to the fire's fading crackle. You step away, feeling the rush of cooler air as you leave the spit's domain. Behind you, the boy begins to tidy his corner, because even now the work isn't truly done. The smell follows you before the sight does a thick, clinging mix of scorched fat, damp wool and smoke that has seeped into every seam of your clothing. Even away from the spit boy's corner, you realize it lingers in the kitchen air like a guest no one invited, but no one can send home. Here in the lower passage, the heat is less direct, yet the memory of it stays on your skin. You've been sent to the back court to fetch more kindling, but the moment you step outside, you're met with another assault, the summer air heavy with the buzzing of flies. They swarm in the heat, drawn by the meat scent from the kitchen chimney. The air itself feels oily thick, with the residue of countless roasts and stews. The stench doesn't just sit in your nose, it seems to coat your tongue until you can almost taste it. Summer is a cruel season in a place like this. The kitchens grow into furnaces, their fires feeding a stifling heat that clings to the castle's stone. Insects find their way into everything buzzing near the bread, crawling along the edge of the barrels, sometimes drowning in the butter. You wave them off the kindling pile, knowing you'll be swatting at them all day. Historians often write about the visual grandeur of medieval feasts. The gold platters, the carved roasts, the steaming pies, but they rarely linger on the sensory toll behind the scenes. The cooks and kitchen hands lived in an environment that gnawed at their bodies, cracked skin from the heat and smoke, raw eyes from constant irritation, and a persistent cough from breathing the same sooty air day after day. Some accounts suggest kitchen staff developed a kind of perpetual rasp in their voices, a roughness that never fully went away. Winter has its own miseries. When the fires aren't roaring, the cold seeps in, fast turning damp clothes into icy shackles that cling to your body. The same hands that blistered in summer now split open in the frost, and every task hauling water, chopping vegetables, scrubbing pots becomes a battle against numb fingers. You remember once hearing an older maid joke that the castle didn't have seasons, only too hot and too cold. Back inside, you pass the same corner where the spit boy still works his face shiny with the same sweat you felt earlier. You can't help thinking that both summer's flies and winter's frost feel like luxury compared to the unending suffocating heat he endures. The kindling clatters into the bin, and you rub your hands against your apron as if you can scrape away the stickiness that's already there. But it's no use. The smell is part of you now, a badge you didn't ask for. The cook waves you over with a grimace. A pan of dripping has overflowed, spilling molten fat onto the hearthstones. The slick surface glistens dangerously in the firelight, and you know exactly why she's calling you. Slips here mean broken bones, and broken bones mean one fewer pair of hands to get through the day. You grab a bucket of ash, scattering it across the spill. The fine powder darkens and clumps, instantly soaking up the grease until the stones lose their shine. With a wooden paddle, you scrape it into a heap, the smell rising in a wave that turns your stomach. Nearby, a pot bubbles furiously, its lid rattling with each burst of steam. A younger boy leans too close, and the cook's voice cracks through the air. Mind your face or you'll lose your eyebrows. He jerks back, cheeks reddening. You've seen worse. One kitchen maid still bears a scar across her wrist from a moment's inattention near a boiling kettle. Historians still argue whether medieval kitchens were more dangerous than the fields outside, but in here the hazards are constant and always a step away. You take the opportunity to glance at your own hands. The skin is cracked in places, the nails rimmed with a stubborn darkness that never fully washes out. In winter, these cracks will deepen and sting. In summer, they'll sting from sweat and salt. Either way, the ache becomes part of you, an unshakable background hum in your body. From the open doorway, a draft rolls in, bringing with it the faintest scent of rain. It's a blessing in the heat, and for a moment the air feels lighter. But that smell also means trouble. Damp air will slow the fires and make drying laundry a nightmare. You tuck the thought away, no doubt someone will be sent to haul wood inside before the kindling takes on moisture. A dog noses your leg sniffing for crumbs. You shoo it away gently, knowing it's likely eaten better today than you have. The cook catches the motion and smirks without looking up. That one's smarter than you think, she mutters. Knows who's got the soft hands, you decide not to argue she's right. Dogs, like people, learn who might slip them a scrap when no one's watching. The afternoon grinds on. The fire roars, then hisses as new logs catch. The air is heavy, your clothes sticking to your back. You reach for the broom to sweep the ash from under the benches each stroke, sending up a fine cloud that sparkles briefly in the shafts of sunlight from the high windows. You breathe through your mouth, trying not to taste it. The sweep takes you into the darker edge of the kitchen, where the light from the hearth barely reaches. Here the air cools slightly, but the floor is littered with scraps, a strip of onion skin, a splash of congealed broth, the brittle wing of a roasted fowl. You bend to gather the worst of it by hand, tossing it into a bucket that will be emptied into the refuse pit before nightfall. The flies follow stubborn in their devotion to every bit of lingering grease. You hear someone at the water barrel, the ladle clinking against its rim. It's the spit boy, again gulping greedily. His face is flushed eyes bright with the kind of tiredness that sits deeper than mere exhaustion. When he catches you watching, he doesn't speak, just tips the ladle back into the barrel and returns to his post without a word. You know better than to slow him with the conversation. The fire won't pause for a chat. Back at the main hearth, the cook is tending a pot of offal stew, stirring with slow, deliberate motions. The smell is sharp and earthy, the kind that seeps into the walls and stays for days. She gestures at you to fetch more salt from the storeroom. You hurry there, passing a laundry maid lugging a dripping bundle that leaves a trail behind her. She mutters about the cold water in the outer basin, cursing the wind that cuts through the courtyard. Even in summer, these walls can channel a chill that feels like it's slicing into your bones. The storeroom is dim, the salt kept in a covered barrel to protect it from damp. You scoop out a bowlful, careful not to spill. Salt is precious here, as much for preserving food as for seasoning it. Some records say salt was so valued that servants could be punished for wasting it. Whether that's entirely true or just a cautionary tale, you've no interest in finding out firsthand. Returning to the kitchen, you pass the fire once more. The smell of scorched fat and smoke has grown stronger, clinging to your nostrils, your hair, your very skin. You know it will follow you into the night, lingering long after the fires are banked. It's part of the toll, physical and sensory, that comes with life in these walls. Historians sometimes gloss over these details, preferring the cleaner lines of battles and banquets. But the truth is here in every breath, every crack in your hands, every sting of smoke in your eyes. The castle runs on the labor of people who endure this cycle day after day, season after season, without applause or even acknowledgement. And as you put the salt into the cook's waiting hands, she doesn't thank you, just nods toward the next task. The work never stops, and neither do you. The call comes from the steward's chamber, a clipped, brisk order, passed down through 3 other servants until it reaches you. Candles must be tended in the great hall before the evening meal. It's a task that feels lighter than hauling wood or scrubbing pots, but you know better. Nothing in this castle is truly light work. It simply weighs on you in different ways. You collect the tools from a narrow cupboard, a long iron snuffer, a small knife for trimming wicks, and a leather pouch holding fresh tapers. The smell of beeswax rises faintly from the pouch, sweet, clean, and almost out of place in a world that smells mostly of smoke and damp wool. These candles are for the nobility's tables, not for the kitchens or the servants' quarters. Stepping into the great hall is like entering another world. The air is cooler here, the light falling in shafts from narrow windows high above. Long trestle tables stretch across the floor, their polished surfaces gleaming faintly. Above banners hang heavy in the stillness, their colors dulled by age but still grand. You move carefully. Your presence here is tolerated only as long as you're invisible in your work. The first candle you approach is tall, set in an ornate brass stand that probably weighs more than you do. Its wick has curled into a blackened nod, the flame guttering unevenly. You pinch it out with the snuffer trim, the charred end, and relight it with a taper from your pouch. The fresh flame leaps up, steady and golden, casting new life onto the brass. Historians sometimes note that candle making and maintenance were as much a matter of status as of function. Beeswax candles burned brighter and cleaner than tallow, but they were expensive, often reserved for the Lord's table or the chapel. Here you see the truth of it. No smoke stains on the vaulted ceiling above, no greasy smell to fight with the aroma of the evening feast. You move from table to table, repeating the same motions, snuff, trim, replace. Each time the small hiss of extinguished flame and the faint crackle of new fire are the only sounds you make. The hall is empty now, but it won't stay that way for long. Already servants are beginning to drift in, carrying platters or arranging the high table. From the corner of your eye you catch the steward watching. He says nothing, but the weight of his gaze is enough to keep your movements sharp and precise. In this task, precision is everything. Uneven light is a mark of carelessness, and carelessness is remembered. You work your way down the length of the hall, the light growing warmer with each renewed flame. At the far end, the high table waits under its canopy, the Lord's place marked by a larger candle in a silver holder. The wax here is so pure it almost glows without the flame. You steady your hand as you trim its wick. Any slip could scar the smooth surface, or worse, draw the steward's disapproval. Above the table's wall, sconces hold more modest candles, their brass fittings warmed by years of touch from other hands like yours. You step onto a low stool to reach them, feeling the wobble beneath your feet as you lean in with the snuffer. A curl of smoke drifts upward, carrying that faint sweetness again. You inhale it slowly, letting it push back some of the kitchen's lingering scents from your nose. It's one of the few pleasant smells you're allowed all day. A pair of pages enter the hall deep in whispered conversation. They glance at you, but don't interrupt skirting around your stool to head for the side door. Their boots click against the stone in a steady rhythm until they're gone, leaving the silence intact. You've learned that moments like this, where the hall is still and your work is steady, can almost feel like peace. On the high dais, the seating chart is already laid out on parchment, weighed at the corners with small stones. Tonight's meal will follow the unspoken map of status, those closest to the Lord at the center, those further down in descending order of importance. You're not the one arranging it, but you've seen the steward obsess over the smallest details, shifting a name card one seat over as if the balance of the castle depended on it. Historians still argue how rigid these arrangements were, but here there's no question seating is politics. You trim the last of the table candles and turn to the alcove by the musician's gallery. Here the candles are fewer, but their placement matters. You relight one watching its glow spread across the carved wood of a music stand. You imagine the hall full later, music, clatter, laughter, none of which will be for you, but all of which you've helped make possible. From somewhere behind you, the steward's voice calls a brief, "Good." It's not gratitude, but in this place it's close enough. With the candles tended, you move to the sideboard where fresh tapers are stored. They're kept wrapped in linen to protect them from dust and damp. You check the bundle, counting quickly enough for tonight, but you'll need to remind someone to send for more before the week's end. Running short in the middle of a feast would be unthinkable. Light is as much part of the show as the food or the music. One of the younger servants passes by, carrying a tray of letters, each sealed with a blob of colored wax. For the upper rooms, he mutters, shifting the weight from one arm to the other. The letters will go to nobles, staying in the guest chambers, summons, invitations, perhaps discreet reminders of debts owed. You watch him head toward the spiral stair, his footsteps fading upward. Delivering messages might sound easier than kitchen work, but you've heard it has its own hazards. Misplacing one or handing it to the wrong person could land you in trouble far worse than a scolding. You take a last slow walk through the hall, letting your eyes skim over each flame. The even glow is satisfying in its quiet way. The brass holders gleam faintly in the new light, their reflections dancing with the flicker. It strikes you how much of your work here is about creating an illusion. The illusion of effortless splendor, as if the candles always burned cleanly, the tables always gleamed, and the room always smelled faintly of beeswax instead of smoke. Historians sometimes overlook these subtler labors, but the truth is, moments like this were part of a servant's invisible skill set. You've learned to move without drawing the eye to complete your work before anyone realizes it needed doing. That's how you avoid both criticism and the wrong kind of attention. By the time you step out into the corridor, the hall feels alive again. Footsteps echoing, voices low but urgent, the clink of goblets being set in place. Somewhere above, the faint sound of a lute drifts down, the musician practicing for the evening's entertainment. You turn toward the service stairs, ready to hand back your tools. No one will mention your work tonight. The Lord and his guests will see the golden light, but not the hands that made it so. And that's the point. Your role here is to vanish into the glow, leaving nothing behind but a room ready to impress. The smell of hay hits you before you even step into the Stableyard. It's sharp and sweet, layered with the sour edge of manure and the musky warmth of horses. The air is thicker here, carrying the humid mix of sweat, both human and animal, that clings to everything. You push open the heavy door, its iron hinges groaning, and step into a world where the pace is slower, but the labor no less punishing. A stable hand waves you over his hands, already deep in the work of mucking out a stall. He stands in a patch of early sunlight, streaming through a high window, the dust dancing in the beams. "Grab a fork," he mutters, jerking his head toward a wall where a row of worn tools leans like tired soldiers. You pick one, a wooden pitchfork smoothed by years of use, and follow his lead. The straw underfoot is damp in places, dark with yesterday's droppings. You thrust the fork in lift and heave it into the wheelbarrow. The motion is simple enough, but it takes only a few repetitions for the muscles in your back and shoulders to start complaining. By the time you've cleared half a stall, sweat beads at your hairline despite the morning chill. A horse in the next stall nudges its head over the partition, sniffing at you curiously. Its breath is warm, carrying the scent of hay and something faintly metallic, bits of iron from the bit, perhaps. You reach up to pat its neck, feeling the powerful muscles shift under its sleek coat. The moment is brief. The stable hand warns you not to linger. "They'll think you're slacking," he says, glancing toward the open door, where the steward might appear at any moment. Historians still argue whether stable work was considered a more prestigious service role because of the close contact with valuable animals, but here it feels as thankless as any kitchen chore. The horses might be pampered, but the people tending them are not. You're expected to keep the stalls spotless, the tack mended, the feed measured precisely, all without complaint. The wheelbarrow is nearly full, heavy enough that its handles bite into your palms when you lift it. You trundle it toward the muck heap at the far edge of the yard, boots slipping slightly in the churned mud. A flock of crows scatters at your approach, settling again as soon as you turn back. Inside, another stable hand is hauling in fresh straw. It lands with a soft thump, golden against the worn wood of the stall floor. You spread it evenly, the dry rustle almost soothing, compared to the wet slap of muck hitting the barrow. Almost. With the stalls freshened, you turn to the water troughs. Each is a shallow wooden basin, heavy and awkward when full, and they need refilling at least twice a day. You heft the bucket from the pump, the metal handle biting into your fingers. The pump's squeak becomes a steady rhythm, up-down water gushing into the bucket with a splash. When it's nearly brimming, you carry it carefully to the trough, the slosh threatening to spill with every uneven stone underfoot. The horses drink eagerly, lips rippling the surface, their breath sending faint ripples of steam into the cool air. One particularly impatient gelding nudges the bucket before you're ready, sending a cold splash down your front. You shiver, but keep working. There's no point in scolding an animal for being thirsty. Once the water's sorted, you're handed a brush and sent to work on the horses' coats. The bristles scrape along their sides, dislodging a mix of loose hair dust and dried sweat. The stable smells sharper now, more alive as each animal shifts and snorts under your touch. The rhythm of the brushing is almost meditative, but the weight of the task builds in your shoulders. These are war horses, carriage horses, hunters, animals worth more than a year of a servant's wages. Any injury, even from a slip of the brush, would bring down the steward's wrath. One stallion tosses its head as you work near its flank, the muscles rippling in warning. You step back quickly. You've seen what a kick can do. A stable hand across the aisle chuckles dryly. He's got better aim than the steward's boot. You smirk, but only briefly. Even jokes here are best kept quiet. A quirky detail you've learned in some castle's stable hands were expected to sleep in the loft above the horses in winter, using the animal's body heat to keep warm. It sounds almost cozy, but the reality is less so. Straw dust in your lungs, the creak of beams with every shift, and the constant awareness that you're sharing your bedroom with creatures that might decide to kick, bite, or panic in the night. Historians still debate whether this was common practice or a last resort in the coldest months. The afternoon light in the stableyard turns golden, but you're too busy to enjoy it. Saddles and bridles need checking. Leather cracks easily in this damp climate, and a broken strap could mean disaster. You run your fingers along each piece, feeling for weakness, then rub in a thin coat of tallow to keep the leather supple. The smell is rich and waxy, clinging to your hands long after the work is done. By late afternoon, the stableyard is a patchwork of shadows and fading light. You're sent out to bring in the horses grazing in the outer paddock before the evening chill sets in. The path is muddy from the morning's rain, each step making a sucking sound as your boots fight to keep hold of the earth. In the field, the horses lift their heads as you approach, ears flicking forward. You call softly, a habit you've picked up from the older hands. It's easier to coax them in with a calm voice than to chase them. The lead mare comes first, her coat glinting faintly in the low sun. You slip the halter over her head, feeling the warmth of her skin through the strap, then lead her toward the yard. The others follow at their own pace, some stopping to snatch a last mouthful of grass. By the time they're all penned, the sky has deepened to a cool grey, and the first hints of evening frost nip at your fingers. Back inside, you fork fresh hay into the mangers, the sound of tearing stalks filling the quiet. The horses eat with steady, rhythmic bites, tails swishing lazily. You take a moment to rest a hand on one's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of its breath. It's the kind of simple contact that almost feels like thanks, though you know it's just instinct on their part. The tack room still needs closing up. You coil the lead ropes, hang the bridles, and check the oil lamps for enough wick to last the night. The stable's wooden beams creak softly overhead, settling into the cold. From the far corner, a stable hand calls for help, lifting a heavy saddle onto a rack. You step in without hesitation, the weight testing the tired muscles in your arms. Historians often romanticize the stable. Imagine it as a place of calm with fresh straw and contented animals, but in truth, it's a constant battle against dirt, damp, and decay. You fight to keep the animals healthy and the gear intact, knowing that a single mistake could cost you not just your place here, but your safety. When the last gate is latched and the final lantern lit, you step out into the yard. The air is sharp, the sky streaked with the faintest blush of lingering sunset. You rub your cold hands together, already thinking of the warmth of the kitchen fire, even if it comes with smoke in your lungs. The kitchen greets you like an old adversary, hot, smoky, and loud. After the relative quiet of the stableyard, the sudden rush of clattering pans and snapping orders makes your ears ring. You slip back into the flow, without a word, weaving between benches as if you never left. The cook barely glances up before pointing to the woodpile. It's running low again, and the hearth must never go cold. You stoop to grab armfuls of logs, the bark rough and flaking under your fingers. Each load feels heavier than the last, though you suspect it's not the wood, it's you. Hours of mucking stalls and hauling water have settled into your muscles like lead. Still, the work doesn't care how tired you are, and neither does the cook. You drop the logs beside the hearth where the spit boy still turns his meat, his eyes glassy with fatigue. The fire breathes greedily as the logs catch, sending a flare of orange up the chimney. The sudden heat pushes back the chill that had crept into your bones outside, but it's the kind of warmth that comes at a price. Within minutes, your skin feels sticky, your hair damp with sweat that traps the kitchen's smells against you, roasting meat, boiling stock, and the faint acrid tang of ash. You're handed a long-handled shovel and directed towards the ash pit beneath the hearth. It's half full, a grey, powdery reminder of the hundreds of fires that have burned here before. You scoop it out carefully, each motion sending a fine cloud into the air. The dust clings to your skin and rises in your throat until you cough a dry, rasping sound that echoes in the small space. Historians sometimes debate how much ash removal factored into a kitchen servant's daily duties, whether it was a dedicated task or simply done when someone noticed. Here it's clear no one leaves the pit too long. If it clogs, the fire will choke and the whole kitchen grinds to a halt. That's a disaster you don't want to be blamed for. As you finish, a small weight brushes against your leg. You glance down to see the kitchen's quiet dog, a scruffy, grey-muzzled creature with one ear bent permanently forward. He looks up at you with the kind of calm familiarity that only comes from years in the same place. Without thinking, you reach down to scratch his head, your hand coming away faintly greasy from his coat. He doesn't care, neither do you. The dog stays near as you move to your next task, skimming the scum from a large pot of boiling stock. The cook hands you a flat wooden spoon, its handle darkened from years of use. The surface of the pot is a restless swirl of bubbles and pale froth. You work slowly, careful not to spill. The broth will be used in sauces for the upper tables, and wasting it would earn you more than a scolding. The smell rising from the pot is rich but heavy, a mix of marrow herbs and the faint bitterness of charred bones. You've smelled it so often it hardly registers any more, except for the sharp little changes that tell you when it's about to boil over, or when something's burning at the bottom. Those little details are survival skills here, the kind you can't write down, but learn in your bones. A sharp crack from the hearth draws your attention. One of the logs has split in the heat, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The spit boy jerks back, instinctively shielding his arms. The cook doesn't look up from her chopping. She trusts him to keep the meat safe, and trusts you to keep the fire fed just enough to roast without burning. The dog pads back to his favorite spot near the hearth, curling up in the heat. You envy his freedom to rest when he pleases. Animals here seem to know their worth in a way servants can't. They're fed because they're useful, but also because they're not expected to hold conversation, to follow endless layers of etiquette. From the doorway, a boy brings in a sack of flour. The white dust coats his tunic in ghostly patches, and he looks half-blinded by it. You step aside so he can set it down, then help him shift the sack closer to the bench where the baker works. The baker grunts thanks, already lost in the rhythm of kneading dough, with forearms like tree trunks. A quirky tidbit you've overheard in some kitchens: dogs were kept not just for companionship or scraps, but as unofficial pest control, chasing away rats from the stores at night. Whether that's their intended role here or not, the quiet dog at your feet certainly seems to take it seriously. His ears flick toward the storeroom whenever a sound stirs inside, but he doesn't bark, just waits, alert but calm. The cook sends you to fetch more onions from the outer store. As you step out, the cooler air of the corridor feels like diving into water after standing too close to a fire. It's a brief reprieve, but enough to make you draw a deeper breath before heading back into the heat. The onion store is dim and close-smelling, the air thick with the bite of raw bulbs. You run your hands through the pile, feeling for the firmest ones, and fill your basket until the weight digs into your palms. On the way back, you hear the faint patter of rain against the outer shutters. The sound is almost soothing, until you remember that damp air will cling to your clothes the moment you step outside, later chilling you to the bone. Back in the kitchen, the cook barely glances up before pointing to a clear space on the table. You set the onions down, and she's already reaching for her knife, slicing in fast, sure strokes. The sharp scent blooms instantly, making your eyes sting. You grab another knife and start peeling the papery skins, working in silence alongside her. The rhythm of slice, peel, and discard is oddly steadying, though the burn in your eyes never fades. The dog has moved closer to you now, lying with his chin on his paws, watching every motion. He's a silent witness to the chaos of the kitchen fires, flaring, knives flashing, voices rising and falling like waves. Occasionally, someone will drop a morsel, and he's on it before it hits the floor. You know he's loyal to whoever feeds him, but in the rare, quiet moments, it almost feels like he's loyal to you. Historians sometimes talk about the kitchen as the castle's engine room, a place where everything that sustains life above is generated below. Standing here, you can feel the truth of that. Every bite the Lord takes, every cup of broth, every crumb of bread, it all passes through this fire, this heat, this smoke, and through your hands, whether anyone notices or not. The cook shouts for the onion skins to be cleared, and you sweep them into a bucket for the refuse pile. Outside, the rain taps harder against the shutters, and you know it will be a cold, damp walk to dispose of the scraps. Still, you push through the door, the dog padding at your heel. The air beyond is sharp and clean, cutting through the smoke that has settled in your lungs. For a moment you just stand there, breathing it in. Then you head for the refuse pit, ready to return to the warmth, not for comfort, but because the next task is already waiting. The laundry yard is quiet compared to the kitchen, but it greets you with its own kind of cruelty. The first shock comes from the water so cold it steals your breath when you plunge your hands in. The basin is nothing more than a large wooden trough set under the open sky, and even in summer the water pulled from the well is icy. In winter it's a small miracle when the surface isn't frozen. Today the pile waiting for you is mostly linens, sheets from the Lord's solar towels from the guest chambers, and the occasional napkin embroidered with initials you're not allowed to touch with dirty hands. You sort quickly heavier items for the stronger arms, smaller pieces for the younger maids. You take a stack of pillowcases for yourself, knowing they'll be easier on your back, if not on your fingers. The work begins with soaking. You push the linens under the surface, watching the water darken with the dust and sweat of the past week. A bar of harsh lye soap sits on the rim, its edges chipped from long use. You rub it hard into the fabric, your knuckles whitening with the effort. The smell is sharp enough to sting your nose, but it's better than the sourness of unwashed cloth. Beside you, another maid beats a damp sheet against a flat stone, the wet slap echoing across the yard. It's faster than scrubbing, but just as hard on the arms. Historians sometimes note that laundry was one of the heaviest domestic tasks in the medieval household, and standing here, you believe it. Every piece is a fight against dirt, against water, against the weight of the cloth itself when it's soaked through. A gust of wind lifts the corner of a drying sheet on the line, snapping it like a sail. You glance toward the row of ropes strung between poles already heavy with dripping linens. In this weather, it will take hours for them to dry, and even then they'll carry the faint tang of damp, unless the sun comes out strong. Your fingers are already reddening from the cold water, but there's no pause. Another basin waits to be emptied and refilled, and the pile beside you doesn't seem to shrink no matter how fast you work. The second basin is worse muddy water from the first rinse clings to the sides, and you tip it out onto the yard stones, watching it stream toward the drain in thin brown rivulets. Your arms ache from the weight, but there's no point in hesitating. Fresh water must be hauled before the soap can work again. You take the buckets, their wooden staves slick and cold, and head for the well. The wind in the courtyard is sharper now, carrying a dampness that bites at your cheeks. The rope on the well creaks as you lower the bucket, then groans under the weight when you haul it back up. The water is heavy, the handle biting into your fingers until you're forced to shift your grip. Back at the basin, you pour it in the surface, rippling as the cold splashes your wrists. It seeps into your sleeves, and you know the wet patches will cling for hours. The rhythm of washing takes over again. Soap rub, rinse, wring. The wringing is the worst. You twist the linen until your forearms burn the water streaming out in pale arcs before pattering onto the stones. A heavier sheet takes both hands and part of your hip for leverage, leaving a damp stripe across your tunic. One of the older laundresses hums under her breath as she works the tune low and repetitive. It's not for entertainment, it's to keep time to pace herself through the endless repetition. She's been at this long enough to know that rushing only leads to sore muscles and mistakes like a soap mark left in a corner that will draw the steward's eye. A quirky detail you once overheard in some castles: fine linens were washed separately in warm water, heated in copper kettles, the heat thought to help preserve their whiteness. Here, the water is never warm, unless you can sneak a bucket from the kitchen hearth, and that's rare. The cold is simply part of the job. Historians still debate whether warm washing was common or a luxury reserved for the richest households. By midday, your back feels as if someone has driven a plank down your spine. The wind has shifted, blowing damp air from the river beyond the walls. You pull another piece from the pile and know, without looking at the sky, that rain would ruin the day's work in minutes. The steward's voice cuts across the yard, sharp and impatient. Those sheets are needed before the bell. You bite back the urge to point out that cloth takes its own time to dry. Instead, you nod and work faster, twisting the linen until your wrists protest. The rope lines sag under the weight of dripping fabric, and you adjust the clothespins so the wind won't tear them loose. By now your fingers have gone past cold into a stiff numbness. You flex them between each piece, trying to keep the blood moving, but the chill in the air makes every movement slower. A loose strand of hair clings damply to your cheek, stuck there by the spray from a particularly aggressive ring. The dog from the kitchen wanders into the yard, sniffing at the wet ground. He follows you for a moment before curling up in a patch of straw under the eaves, wisely avoiding the puddles. You envy his ability to simply choose warmth and dryness when he wants it. You gather the driest linens first, folding them while they're still faintly warm from the brief spells of sun. Each fold has to be precise, corners aligned, edges smoothed, because any sign of carelessness will be noticed when they're laid on the Lord's bed. The thicker towels are stacked separately, heavy and slightly damp, but they'll finish drying inside. A younger maid struggles with a soaked tablecloth, the weight pulling her forward. You step in to help, each of you taking an end. Together you twist the water streaming out in a thick rope before spattering onto the stones. When it's finally light enough to lift you, drape it over the line, both of you breathing hard. Historians often mention how laundry was women's work in the medieval household, but what they don't always note is the sheer physical demand of it. You can feel it now in every muscle of your arms, shoulders, and back. It's not dainty work. It's labor as grueling in its own way as hauling hay or turning a spit. As the last piece is hung, you gather your tools, a half-worn bar of soap, the wooden paddle, the empty buckets. The yard smells faintly cleaner now, though the damp air promises that smell won't last long. You glance back at the rows of white cloth fluttering in the wind, then turn toward the door. The warmth of the kitchen will be waiting, even if it comes with its own brand of discomfort. The rain has eased into a mist by the time you cross the yard toward the stables again. Evening is pressing in, the light fading to a dim blue-grey that seeps into the stone walls. The air smells of wet earth and horsehide, and your boots leave dark prints on the slick ground. Inside the stables are quieter than in the morning. Most of the horses stand in their stalls, heads lowered, the sound of their breathing steady in the cool air. A stable hand greets you with a nod, his hands busy repairing a leather strap. By the light of a small oil lamp, "New gelding in the far stall," he says, without looking up. "Needs a check before night." You make your way down the row, the wooden boards creaking beneath you. The new horse watches you approach, ears twitching but not pulling away. Its coat is still damp from the rain, a few patches of mud clinging to its legs. You run your hands along its flank, feeling for heat or swelling, checking each hoof for lodged stones. The faint warmth of the animal seeps into your palms, a welcome contrast to the chill lingering in your fingers. Satisfied, you fetch a dry cloth and begin rubbing down the coat in long, firm strokes. The smell of wet horse rises, mingling with the sharper scent of oiled leather from the tack room. The rhythmic motion is almost soothing, though your shoulders protest after a day's worth of other labor. From somewhere deeper in the stable, you hear the soft clink of metal. Another hand is mending a bit or buckle. Historians still argue over whether evening stable work was considered lighter duty, but here you can feel it's simply another phase of the day's grind. The tasks change, but the weight never lifts. When the horse's coat is mostly dry, you fork fresh hay into the manger. The rustle draws the others' attention, heads lift, ears flick, and the sound of chewing soon fills the air. For a moment, the stable feels warmer, more alive, as if the animals themselves are settling in for the night. With the feeding done, you turn to the gear that will be needed in the morning. Saddles, bridles, and harnesses hang along the tack room wall, their dark leather gleaming faintly in the lamplight. You take a rag dipped in warmed tallow and begin working it into the leather, your fingers following the lines of each strap, each stitch. The smell is rich and waxy, clinging to your hands, but it keeps the gear from cracking in the cold. A stable hand joins you, setting a bridle on the workbench. One of the cheek pieces is frayed, the stitching worn through. He threads a heavy needle with waxed cord and begins to sew, the slow pull of thread and the occasional creak of the leather filling the quiet between you. In a place where much of the day is filled with clamor, this steady rhythm feels almost like rest if you can ignore the ache in your back. The wind rattles the stable doors and a draft snakes along the floor. You pull your cloak tighter, but the cold still finds its way to your skin. Even the horses shift uneasily, their tails flicking in the dim light. You move to check the shutters on the small windows, fastening each one against the night air. The smell of the yard drifts in before you close the last, a mix of rain-soaked hay and the faint tang of wood smoke from the kitchen chimney. Historians sometimes debate whether medieval stables were insulated enough to protect horses from the worst of winter's bite. Standing here, you'd guess not, at least not completely. The animals huddle toward the center, where the warmth from their bodies collects, but the outer stalls feel distinctly colder. In the loft above, you can hear the rustle of stored hay and faintly the scurrying of mice. The stable hand finishes his repair and hangs the bridle back in place. You wipe the last of the tallow from your fingers onto a rag and check the oil lamps topping them up so they'll last through the night. The golden pools of light they cast make the shadows feel less heavy, but they also remind you of how much work is left. Closing up is never just closing up. From the far stall, a gelding stamps its hoof, the sound ringing through the stable. You make a mental note to check its shoe in the morning, adding one more task to tomorrow's growing list. The last task of the evening is repairing the worn halters. You gather them in a bundle and sit on the low bench near the tack room where the lamplight pools warm and steady. The leather feels stiff in places, soft in others, telling you where it's been strained or rubbed too often. With a small knife, you trim the frayed edges, then rub in more tallow until the surface gleams faintly. The smell is grounding, part animal, part craft, part the quiet satisfaction of restoring something movable. A young mare watches you from her stall, her dark eyes following the slow movement of your hands. She shifts her weight and exhales the sound almost like a sigh. You pause to give her a scratch along the jaw, feeling her lean into it. It's a small moment of connection that doesn't belong to the steward or the lord, just you and the animal sharing the same space in the fading day. The stable hand from earlier reappears with a hammer and nails to tighten a loose board in the feed bin. The sharp taps echo off the beams, mingling with the rustle of hay as the horses take their last bites before settling down. Overhead, the hayloft creaks as someone shifts a bale dust motes, drifting down in lazy spirals. Historians often note that a well-kept stable was a mark of pride for a household, but they rarely dwell on how much unseen work went into achieving that standard. Here you can feel it in every tightened strap, every swept aisle, every check on a hoof or latch before you call it done. When the last halter is hung back in place, you take one final walk down the aisle. Each stall is closed, each animal quiet. The air is warmer now, filled with the steady hum of breathing and the faint grassy scent of hay. You blow out the lamps one by one, leaving only the moonlight from a high window to silver the straw. Outside the yard is colder, the mist from earlier settling into a thin frost on the ground. You pull your cloak tight and head toward the kitchen's glow, your boots crunching softly. The warmth you're walking toward isn't comfort, it's just the next shift of work waiting. Night has settled over the castle, wrapping the outer walls in a quiet so deep you can almost hear your own breath. The sky is a heavy slate moonlight slipping through, only in pale fragments between clouds. You pull your cloak tighter and make your way toward the gatehouse where the portcullis looms like a giant's jaw. This is your post now, the night watch. The cold here is sharper than in the stableyard, the open air funneling through the stone archway. You can feel it creeping through your boots, numbing your toes within minutes. The torch fixed to the wall throws a small circle of light, beyond which lies only shadow and the faint gleam of frost on the ground. You stand just outside its glow, where you can see without being easily seen. The routine is simple, but simplicity doesn't mean ease. You scan the dark for movement, listen for sounds that don't belong, The snap of a twig, the scrape of a boot, the distant roll of a cart's wheel. Most nights there's nothing but wind and the occasional hoot of an owl, but you've been told stories of worse raiders testing the walls, desperate peasants slipping in to steal food, even rival messengers creeping close with intent to spy. Historians still argue how often such dangers truly appeared at a medieval castle's gate, but here in the stillness you can believe the tales. The emptiness itself feels like a warning, as though something unseen could be waiting just beyond the tree line. Your breath clouds in the air, vanishing almost as soon as it forms. The leather strap of your lantern digs into your palm as you shift your weight from one foot to the other. Above, the faint creak of the portcullis chains reminds you that if needed, you could drop the gate in seconds. It's a heavy comfort knowing that your post is the first line between safety and danger. A crust of bread waits in your pocket for later, though it's gone hard from the cold. It's not much of a reward for hours of vigilance, but you'll take it. In the night, watch you learn to be satisfied with small things. The wind shifts, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke from the village beyond the walls. It's a reminder that while the castle sleeps, life outside continues. Hearths still burning, perhaps a late pot of stew simmering in some small cottage. You keep your eyes forward, though. Letting your mind drift too far beyond the gate is how mistakes happen. A fox darts across the frost-covered ground just outside the torchlight, its coat a flicker of red before it disappears into shadow. You hear the faint rustle of its paws in the grass, then silence again. It's moments like this, quick, soundless, that keep your senses taut. Every movement demands an evaluation, friend, foe, or nothing at all. Above you, one of the tower guards shifts his stance. The scrape of his boots on the stone parapet is faint, but you know he's making the same scan you are, just from higher ground. The watch is a chain of vigilance. Break one link and the whole thing fails. A group of travelers approaches along the road, their lanterns bobbing faintly in the dark. You tense, squinting through the gloom, until the outlines resolve into something harmless. Two merchants, a cart pulled by a mule, and a boy walking ahead. You hail them softly enough to let them know they've been seen, but not enough to wake the inner keep. They nod, keep moving, and soon vanish into the night beyond the gate's shadow. Historians sometimes debate whether the night watch was truly dangerous or mostly dull. Standing here, you know the truth. It's both, and you don't get to choose which night is which. Hours can pass with nothing but the cold for company, and then without warning, the quiet can split open with something you'll remember for years. From the corner of your eye, you notice frost beginning to form along the lower bars of the portcullis. You scrape it away with a gloved hand. It's not strictly necessary, but the small act keeps you moving, keeps your blood flowing. The cold doesn't care about your duties. It seeps in regardless, testing the edges of your resolve. The hours stretch in the cold, each one marked only by the slow crawl of the moon across the gaps in the clouds. Your breath comes in steady puffs, hands wrapped tight around the lantern for what little warmth it offers. The crust of bread in your pocket feels like stone now, but you bite into it anyway, dry, tasteless, yet enough to quiet the dull ache in your stomach. Somewhere far off, a wolf howls, the sound carrying easily through the still air. It's distant, but it curls into your thoughts, reminding you that the darkness beyond the wall belongs to things you'll never see until they're too close. You scan the tree line more often now, though you know the torchlight only reaches so far. A shadow moves in your periphery. You grip the lantern tighter, stepping into its light to catch the shape, just a servant from the inner ward, his arms full of firewood. He passes without a word, heading toward the guardroom. The brief flare of recognition eases the tension in your shoulders. Not every shape in the dark is a threat, but each one has to be checked. Historians often write about the symbolism of the portcullis as a fortress's jaw, but standing beneath it, you understand its real weight, not just in iron and chain, but in the responsibility it represents. Lower it too late, and lives could be lost. Lower it too soon, and you might trap allies outside in the cold. Either way, the choice is yours to make in the span of a heartbeat. The final hour of your watch is the hardest. Fatigue settles in your bones, making the shadows seem thicker, the cold sharper. The silence isn't comforting. It presses on your ears, amplifying every small sound into something worth fearing. When your relief finally arrives, it's without ceremony. A nod, a shared glance, and you hand over the lantern. Your legs feel stiff as you step away, and the warmth of the inner passage is almost startling after so many hours breathing the open air. You know you'll sleep lightly. Night watch doesn't let go of you easily even after you've left the gate. The corridor beyond the guardroom is dim, the light from your lantern pooling against the walls in soft gold. Here the air is still thick with the scent of old stone wax and something faintly metallic, perhaps the tang of the iron hinges and locks you pass. Your steps are quiet, softened by the worn rushes scattered along the floor. You begin your rounds, moving deeper into the castle's sleeping heart. The hallways twist and narrow, sometimes opening suddenly into wide spaces where the ceiling vanishes into shadow. Your lantern throws long shapes ahead of you, distorting the carved faces in the woodwork until they seem to shift when you're not looking directly at them. A draft curls around your ankles as you pass a side passage. You glance toward it, noting the small window at the far end, standing slightly ajar. You close it gently, the latch clicking into place, and make a mental note to mention it to the steward. Open windows at night mean more than cold air. They're a weakness in the castle's skin. The silence here is different from the stillness at the gate. It's layered like cloth upon cloth, muffling the world. The only sounds are the low hiss of your breath, the soft squeak of the lantern handle in your grip, and the occasional faint shuffle from somewhere above. Historians still argue whether night rounds were meant more for security or for signaling authority, reminding anyone awake that the castle's eyes never truly closed. Walking these halls, you suspect it's both. You can feel the weight of being the one presence moving through the dark, the quiet assurance to the walls themselves that someone is watching. You pass the chapel, its door closed but not locked. Through the gap, you catch a flicker of the sanctuary lamp. The smell of beeswax drifts out gentler here than in the great hall, carrying with it a stillness that makes you pause. It's tempting to linger in the quiet glow, but your path is set and the lantern pulls you onward. You turn down a narrower passage, one the nobles rarely use, its walls bare and cold to the touch. The stones here sweat in the damp, and the light from your lantern catches tiny beads of moisture like a scatter of pale stars. Your shadow moves ahead of you, stretching and bending over the uneven floor, leading you deeper into the silence. In the distance, a faint thump echoes a door closing somewhere far away, or perhaps just the wind pushing against the shutters. You pause, holding your breath to listen. The castle holds its breath with you, the stillness pressing close. When nothing follows, you move on each step, deliberate, the lantern swaying gently at your side. One of the outer windows is unlatched, its frame rattling softly in the draught. You push it closed, feeling the night's cold spill briefly against your hand before the latch clicks shut. These small acts feel inconsequential in the moment, but you know they matter. Historians sometimes gloss over such details, but an unsecured window could mean an easy path for a thief, or worse. You take a side stair up to the gallery that runs above the main hall. From here you can see the banquet tables below, their surfaces bare and waiting for tomorrow's feast. The rows of candles you trimmed earlier stand unlit, their wicks black and neat. In the darkness, the hall feels like a painting still framed but alive in some quiet way. From the far end of the gallery, a shadow detaches itself from the wall. It's only another guard, his lantern briefly flaring as it catches yours. You exchange nods, no words. Conversation would feel out of place here, as if the stone itself might disapprove. You descend again, this time toward the servants' passages. These halls are tighter, their ceilings lower, the air warmer from the kitchens far below. You pass a stack of folded linens, left for the morning, crisp, neat, and faintly scented with lye soap. The rounds are less about covering ground quickly and more about touching every corner, making sure nothing is amiss. You don't rush. In the night, speed is the enemy. Patience is your shield. The lower corridor opens into a small antechamber near the postern door. Here the air is colder, tinged with the scent of damp earth from the slope beyond the walls. You check the heavy bolt, it's secure, and run your hand along the wood, feeling for any give or weakness. Satisfied, you turn back toward the inner keep, your lantern sending light spilling over the stone like a tide. In one of the side halls, you notice a faint glow under a closed door. You pause, leaning in just enough to listen. There's no sound from within, only the faint flicker of firelight. Whoever is inside either has permission to be there or is confident enough not to hide it. You move on. Some doors aren't yours to open, even when curiosity gnaws at you. A cold spot catches your attention as you walk, a sudden dip in temperature so sharp it feels like stepping into a shadow with weight. The lantern's flame flutters, but there's no draught you can find. You stand still for a moment, letting the silence settle around you, then keep moving. In a place this old, you learn not to question every oddity. Historians sometimes speak of the ghost stories of great houses with a dismissive smile, but you've walked these corridors enough to know that the dark can hold more than just shadows. Whether it's memory, air, or something older, it walks here too. You pass the last bend, the familiar scuff marks on the wall, telling you you're close to the guardroom again. Your feet know the path now without needing your eyes. The air warms slightly, the faint scent of smoke from the banked hearth reaching you before you see the door. When you step inside, the quiet of the hallways clings to you for a moment longer. You hand over your lantern to the next watch, feeling the weight leave your palm, but not quite your mind. Somewhere in the dark, the castle still breathes, and you've simply stepped out of its rhythm. The night softens as you leave the watch behind. The corridors you've walked for hours now lie untouched, their shadows undisturbed, until the next set of steps makes its way through. You move more slowly now, letting the air settle on your skin, feeling the weight of the day finally shift from your shoulders. Somewhere deep in the keep, a door closes with a muted thud, and then there's only the faint, steady hum of the castle at rest, the creak of timber, the whisper of wind against shutters, the quiet breathing of walls that have stood for centuries. It's a sound you've grown to know as much as your own heartbeat. You imagine the scullery maid asleep by the kitchen's cooling hearth, the spit boy curled on his stool, at last the stable settling into the soft shuffle of hooves and rustle of hay. The linen on the line in the yard will hang in the moonlight edges, swaying in the breeze. Every space you've touched today, each stall, each table, each hall now holds its own stillness, stitched together by the unseen labor that keeps this place alive. The lanterns you tended earlier still burn in the great hall, casting their golden glow over empty chairs and polished wood. Upstairs, the nobility sleep in beds layered with those heavy linens you wrung and folded. And outside, the portcullis stands closed, its iron teeth guarding the quiet you've helped secure. You let the image linger, a castle breathing easy, because a dozen hands like yours have kept it so. Then you breathe out long and slow, letting the thought settle like a blanket. For now the work is done. Let the fires bank low, let the wind hum against the walls, let the stone keep its secrets until morning. Sleep well.